Start. Okay. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Okay, so we're reading from the Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani rahimahullah, primarily as a text for learning, like, grammar and Arabic and so on, and then secondarily, right, for the actual contents of itself. So this section of the Risala, of course, is going to be on different abwab as it relates to fiqh, particularly the fiqh of tahara. So it's going to be dealing with like purification and so on. But again, that's not the primary thing for the class. So I'm not really going to go into detail about the fiqh aspects of it, but I just want us to read. So today, in the handout, you'll see I've kind of broken up the page that we're going to read from today with some interspersed notes. So it's going to start from وَلَيْسَ الْإِسْتِنْجَاءُ مِمَّا يَجِبُ أَنْ يُوصَلَ بِهِ إِلَى آخِرِهَا. So it's going to begin with that paragraph, and then it will end with the paragraph about وَمَنْ لَمْ يَخْرُجْ مِنْهُ بَوْلٌ وَلَا غَائِطٌ to the end. So we're pretty much just going to read from that page. So what I would like to do is just read the text, and then we'll swing back around and go paragraph by paragraph through the notes that I've prepared. So I want us just to get a little bit of muscle memory of just reading the text with a minimal amount of commentary, inshallah. And then again, we'll go back around. So Rob, if you want to, let's see, let me make sure I'm on the right page here. Okay, so let's begin. Sifatul wudu'i. الاستنجاء لما يجب أن يصلى به الوضوء لا في سنن الوضوء ولا في فرائضه وهو من باب إيجاب زوال النجاسة به أو بالاستجمار. نعم. لئلا صح. نعم. لئلا يصلي بها في جسده ويجزئ. هذا ألف مقصورة مهموزة. Right. الحروف الأخير في الكلمة يجزئ، ألف مقصورة مهموزة. يجزئ فعله بغير نية، وكذلك غسل الثوب النجس. تمام. Okay. Inshallah, let's go to the next paragraph, which in this case is going to be on page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think it's going to be on page 6. So it will begin with وصفة الاستنجاء أن يبدأ.
وصفة الاستنجاء أن يبدأ بعد غسل يده فيغسل مخرج البول ثم يمسح ما في المخرج من الأذى بمدر أو غيره أو بيده ثم يحكها بالأرض ويغسلها ثم يستنجي بالماء ويواصل صبه ويسترخي قليلا ويجيد عرق ذلك بيده حتى يتنظف وليس عليه غسل ما بطن من المخرجين ولا يستنجي من ريش.
تمام. نعم. ومن استجمر بثلاثة. Sorry, I didn't put the page numbers on the pages, but it'll be at the very top. This, second to last page. ومن استجمر بثلاثة أحجار. ومن استجمر أو بالوصلة ومن استجمر فهو ألف دون همزة فالحكم الوصلة بالكسرة. ومن استجمر أو ومن استجمر.
ومن استجمر بثلاثة أحجار يخرج آخرهن نقيا أجزاءه ومعه أطهر
وأطيب. هذا الوزن الأفعل أكبر أكثر أصغر أطهر أطيب وأحب.
وأحب
إلى العلماء. تمام. والأخير ومن لم يخرج
منه بول ولا غائط ولا
وتوضأ مش لا. نعم.
لحدث أو نوم أو لغير ذلك مما يوجب الوضوء فلا بد من غسل يديه قبل دخولهما في الإناء.
ولا بد. نعم. تمام. Good. Okay. So, as you can guess, this section is about what? Sifatul wudu'i. It's going to be about the descriptions of wudu. What are they? ومسنونه. ما معنى مسنون؟ مسنون من أي كلمة؟ مسنون في سين واحد واثنين نون. So عندنا كلمة كذلك سنة. So شيء بني على السنة هو مسنون. Right? So if you have the word sunnah, we all are familiar with the word sunnah. So sunnah هو شيء. Right? Sunnah, it's a thing. So we say هذا أو هكذا sunnah. But when you want to use it, تريد أن تستعمل كصفة, if you want to use it as an adjective, فبني على مسنون. مسنون. السين نون مشددة. Right? In the jazr of sunnah, the noon has a shadda. So this implies that the ultimate jazr, right, or the root, is going to be what? Sin plus noon plus noon. So in some constructions, we will concatenate this to a noon مشدود, noon with a shadda. But مثلا ما هو الجمع لكلمة سنة? So ما هو ما هو الجمع للكلمة سنة؟ صحيح، سنن. سنن. Right? So in this case, in the plural, we bring back both and we have both noons in the word. So the plural of sunnah is sunan. This is why you will find some of the collections of ahadith, they will be called what? Sunan ibn Majah or Sunan ibn Abi Dawood, and on and on and on, right? So, or ibn Abi Dawood. So that means, right, these are the collections of the sunnahs and so on and so on. But when we want to make it into like an adjective, something that is receiving that adjective, then receiving that adjective, then we call it masnoon. So the mim, harf za'ida, right, which means what? Shay'un aw makan, and then masnoon. So that's what it means there. Likewise, mafruda, right, or mafrud. So we have masnoon and mafruda. Mafrud. We can already guess from our three root letters, fa plus ra plus dad. We know when something is fard, right? It is mandatory to do. So, هو شيء مفروض. وكذلك هو شيء مسنون. So something can be a thing that is sunnah and a thing that is mandatory. So he's describing them in this way. Now, what is with this وَذِكْرُ الْإِسْتِنْجَاءِ? ما هو dhikr? In the actual text, it's written as dal, kaf, and ra. But what is the word that we know that's spelled this way but is actually what? This. What is this word? Dhikr. What is this word? This is dhikr in North African dialect. Right? So, again, Ibn Abi Zayd, he was from that area. And so, even though he's writing in Fusha, they still sometimes, particularly when they were going through the makhtuta, like the actual manuscript that he wrote it without a dot. So, it's written in the kind of colloquial dialect of North Africa, dhikr. But, يحتمل المعنى ذكر. So, وَالذِّكْرُ الْإِسْتِنْجَاءِ. Dhikr can mean two things. Al-wahid, right? What is the most common that we understand as dhikr? Right? Dhikr is like what? La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, Subhanallah, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, wa kada. So we know dhikr as being like what we would say in English, like a litany of things that we can say. And we also know that it is to remember Allah Ta'ala, mithlu dhikr Allah, right? To remember Allah. But then also, dhikr can also mean what? Because from the ism of dhikr comes the fi'l of dhakara. Dhakara means what?
To remember.
It also means what?
To remind.
He mentioned. Right? So, in English, we can say it can mean a reminder, but it can also mean like a mentioning. So, صفة الوضوء والمسنونه ومفروضه وذكر يعني ذكر الاستنجاء والاستجمار, and mentioning about. the two things of istinja and istijmar. Istinja, ما هو istinja? What is istinja?
Cleaning up.
Particularly في سياق الفقه. In the context of fiqh, what is istinja? Right? So the clue is going to be in the first sentence. ليس الاستنجاء مما يجب أن يوصل به الوضوء ولا في سنن الوضوء ولا في فرائضه وهو من باب إيجاب زوال النجاسة به أو استجمار لئلا يصل بها من في جسده ويجزئ فعله بغير نية وكذلك غسل ثوب النجس. So it is about the removing of something from your body when you go to relieve yourself in the bathroom of bawl al-gha'it, right? Removing urine or feces, but primarily with what? Not wudu, because he says ليس الاستنجاء مما يجب أن يوصل به الوضوء. He says what? Istinja should not be thought to be something actually connected with wudu. It is not connected with wudu. Wudu is separate from istinja. Istinja is about the removal of bawl, right, of urine, al-gha'it, or feces from the body before one can make wudu, because those things are considered what? Hadith, right? Those things are considered to be things that mana' tahara, they prohibit you from having it if they're on your body, right? So to remove urine, we use water, right? So the method of removing these things that are considered najasa, these things that are considered impurities, one method is with water, and when it comes to that which is bawl, and to some extent gha'it, right, the feces, using water, we call this istinja. Right. That's what we call istinja. So he says, what? وَذِكْرُ الْإِسْتِنْجَاءِ وَالْإِسْتِجْمَارِ. Istijmar, now, remind me your name again, please? Sarman. So Sarman is going to cheat here because he just came from Hajj. So what is it that you do in Hajj? So we have istijmar. Istijmar. From the verb istajmara. Now he just came from Hajj. He's kind of cheating. It's not fair. What do you do as one of the acts after Mina? Jamar. Jim Mim Ra. What do you do at the Jamarat? Right. But do you take a boulder? Like, I mean, sometimes, man, you see people get up to the Jamarat and they're like, look, this is not what you do at this point, right? You take what? Pebbles, small stones, and you use this to stone the shaitan at the jamarat, right? So there is a connection between that word and that rite that you do, that type of ibadah that you do in the jamarat. You use small stones. There's another type of cleaning used to remove impurities from the body. It is with stones, small stones, and it is called istijmar. That's what it is, right? So he just came from Hajj, so he's, we don't get to cheat. He knew what it was. Okay. So he says, وَلَيْسَ الْإِسْتِنْجَاءُ مِمَّا يَجِبُ أَنْ يُوصَلَ بِهِ. So the first thing that I want to go over here, and this is an important milestone, in my opinion, of the Arabic student being able to kind of go up a level. In the beginning, we learn past tense, madin, we learn present tense, mudari', right? He threw it, he throws it, right? We learned that. But these all fall under these are what we call ma'lum. This is the active voice, right? So if I say, ضرب زيد عمرا, poor Umar, in every example, in every Arab book, Zayd is always beating somebody up. I don't know what is Zayd's problem, but he's a very violent person. He needs to turn back to Allah. If we say Zayd hit Umar, we know that Zayd huwa al-fa'al wal-fa'al ma'lum. Zayd is the one doing the action, and he's known. We know who he is. So whether it is Zayd hit Omar or Zayd is hitting Omar, he's doing it now in the present tense, this all falls under what we call in English, this is the active voice. But as I said, reading, especially without the harakat, without the tashkil, initially is difficult. And one of those difficulties is knowing when is it going to be active and when is it going to be passive, right? So active, we said, is what? Ma'lum. And majhul is going to be the passive. Once you gain the ability to recognize when the author is applying or utilizing the active versus the passive, this is a good sign, right? You're able, and this is what will allow you to be able to read texts with a greater sense of confidence. So our first example here in the first sentence, وَلَيْسَ الْإِسْتِنْجَاءُ مِمَّا يَجِبُ أَنْ يُوصَلَ بِهِ. يُوصَلَ is يُوصَلَ بِهِ. يُوصَلَ. Now, it would actually be يُوصَلُ, and we'll get into why. So this verb, يُوصَلَ بِهِ, let's strip it down. مَا هُوَ الْجَذَرُ? What is going to be the root of it? وَصَ. Right, so waw, صاد, lam. Now we call this kind of verb, we have af'al, mithal. So we have verbs that if they begin with a waw or a ya, we call these mithal because they begin with a harf addi. They begin with a weak vowel. This is different. This is like beginning with a hamza or an alif with hamza. This is different. We'll get into that later. But those that begin with a waw or a ya, because they are weak vowels, they're going to have their own specific rules. One of those rules is that a waw or a ya can become one or the other or go away altogether. So a waw can become a ya can become a waw, it can go away altogether. So if we take our root of waw, sin, and lam, وَبُنِيَ عَلَى الْفَعَلَ, we get what? وَصَلَ. And هذا الماضٍ, the past tense, وَصَلَ. The present tense, if I can write today, the present tense, يَصِلُ. وَصَلَ, يَصِلُ. وَصَلَ, connect. So he connected, he connects. In the past tense, wasala. In the present tense conjugation, the waw becomes a ya. And so we get wasalatu yasilu. That's with the active voice. This is ma'lum. But what we have here is yusalu. It's yusala bihi because of the n before it. So he says what? N yusala bihi. So the reason why the lam in yusala bihim is maftuha is because of it is preceded by the n. We've talked about that before, and so I won't repeat that again. So that's why it's the nasab on the end of the lam is because of that. But as we said, it's really yusalu. So if we were to take the form of af'ala, like as in aslama and ahsana, and we apply that to our root of waw, sin, and lam, we're not going to get this. We're not going to get awsala, right? That kind of sounds weird. In the present tense, because again, this changes, we're going to get what? A ya and then a waw. So we're going to get you, si, lu. Yusilu is going to be ma'lum. That's going to be the active voice. Yusilu. If we change this to a fatha, just change the middle letter from a kasra to a fatha, then we get the majhul. We get yusalu. So ma'lum yusilu. And the majhul yusalu. Now, the real question is, okay, great. We now know active versus passive. But what is the implication for this? So when we want to say, just reading here directly from the notes, it is connected. We are using the passive voice, but in the present tense. Now, a lot of times we're used to the passive voice in the past tense. So for instance, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. And when it was said to them, was, right, in the past, said to them, don't make fasad. Or بُنِيَ الْإِسْلَامُ عَلَى خَمْسٍ من اللفظ من النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام. When the Prophet said what? Islam was built on 5 things. So we may be more comfortable or more familiar with the passive voice, but in the past tense. But there's also a present tense passive voice. And that is exactly what we have here with yusalu, or specifically in the sentence, and yusala bihi. So what is going on with that? What's the point of that? Alhamdulillah, inshallah, we learn to recognize it. But why would an author, what is happening when the active voice and the passive voice are being used? So it does not mean that the action has already been completed. Some people have the misunderstanding that, oh, if you're using the passive voice, it's like it is connected in this case. And yusala bihi, it is connected. Because of the ed, at least in English, our tendency might be to think that the action is completed. The only time the action is completed is if it is what? Past tense. If it's not completed, then it means it's ongoing. So this is where you have to kind of rearrange a little furniture in your head in English when we are thinking of these things. So it does not mean the action is already completed, but rather the action is happening right now, repeatedly or habitually, or is in a state of ongoing. And therefore, we do not explicitly mention the doer of the action. So this is going to be one of the important takeaways of the difference between the active and the passive. So in the active voice, the doer or the agent, or however you want to phrase it, of the action is known, and therefore the emphasis is on the doer or the subject. So when it's in the active voice, the emphasis is going to be on the one doing the action. Allahu alladhi khalaqa as-samawati wal-ard. Allah is the one who created the heavens and the earth. In this ayah, in this sentence, the emphasis is on Allah. And secondarily, what He did. Right? But the emphasis is going to be on the actor or the doer. As you can probably guess, in the passive voice, right, the subject or the doer is not mentioned explicitly. Are we clear between explicit and implicit, right? So it's not directly mentioned. This has the results, as you can guess, it places the emphasis on the action and not the doer of the action. And we want to, again, ask the question, okay, great, but how is that important? So, turning our page, right, why the passive voice? An author might want to use the passive voice for a few common reasons. To remove focus on the doer. So in this case, Ibn Abi Zayd is talking about doing wudu. And he's talking about doing wudu, or in this case, something that might come before wudu, like istinja and istijmar. He's talking about doing these things. Therefore, whoever does them, it is not important. Whether we're talking about the Prophet ﷺ doing it, Abu Bakr doing it, me and you doing it, potentially anybody doing it, it doesn't matter. And therefore, the subject is not explicitly mentioned, it's implied, because somebody's going to do the action, but whoever does it doesn't matter. What matters is, how is the action being done? So that is one of the reasons why you will want to, in that case, want to use the passive voice versus the active voice to emphasize something that is going to be universal. This is why, particularly in books of fiqh that are explaining what? What do you learn in fiqh? How to worship Allah. You learn the ahkam, you learn the rulings for things. This is how you do A and this is how you do B. And those rules are going to be what? Universally applicable. So if we're learning the ahkam of, say, Salat al-Asr, does it matter whether we're talking about Salat al-Asr at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, 3,000 years in the future, whether it's done by a man or a woman or such, right? Generally speaking, Salat al-Asr is going to be what? 4 raka'ah, and it's going to be after Dhuhr, and da-da-da-da-da. Therefore, whoever is doing Salat al-Asr is not important, so we don't need to mention their name. What we want to learn is, how do you do Salat al-Asr? So that's one of the functions of the passive voice, is to be able to speak on a thing, to explain it, particularly the mechanics of it, how it may work, and removing the specificity of the doer because they are not really applicable. Now, in cases where that is, then you will find they will use the active voice, where the person doing it, then it does become important. And so we'll have one example later in the page where we'll show that then he switches to an active voice, and then you'll be able to kind of see and draw the comparisons and the differences. So what? Using the passive voice, it removes focus from the doer. It's not about who is connecting istinja to wudu, but that you should not, anyone, no one should connect the necessity or the act of doing istinja or istijmar to wudu. As when we go back and read the paragraph, right, the emphasis is it should not be connected. Whoever you are, do not associate the rules and the necessity of istinja with the rules and the necessity of wudu. They are two separate things. So it's a way of what the rulings about the action itself, meaning is it obligatory that wudu be tied to istinja in some way or not? Obviously he is emphasizing no, it should not be tied to that. So the passive voice allows for ideas, concepts, or rulings to kind of stand on their own or stand isolated. And it's to emphasize the rule or the state. And so the question is istinja, is removing urine or feces from you, is this part of wudu or not? No, it is not. So he uses this particular phrase, ليس الاستنجاء مما يجب أن يوصل به الوضوء ولا في سنن الوضوء. So, cleaning oneself with water should not, after going to the bathroom of number one or number two, should not be connected to the act of wudu. This is important because it tells us, one, where you will do istinja or istijmar will not be done in the place that you will do wudu. And therefore, by there being no connection between the two, they will also imply that they will be kind of done in separate places. Now, this is an unfortunate tragedy of living in the Western world that has no Sharia. Christians are kind of unfortunately divorced from any concept of a Sharia. This has influenced their architectural conceptions. So when they build bathrooms, they put everything in the same room. This is why when you go to places like the Al-Hamra in Spain, or other places like in the past where Muslims built these really beautiful masajid and you see these fountains outside, they're not koi fountains, right? They're not like fountains for make a wish and flip a coin or have a bunch of fish swimming around in them. Right? The idea was what? The place to relieve yourself of impurities is over there, and the place to purify yourself is over here, right? So that idea that they were separate, and therefore there is no connection. There is a relationship between the two. Why do I want to make wudu? Because I have to pray. I have an obligation to pray. But if I have impurities on me, that will prohibit me from praying. So there is a relationship between istinja and wudu, but there's not a connection between their performance. And that's what he's emphasizing by putting it here in the passive voice. So ليس الاستنجاء مما يجب أن يوصل به الوضوء ولا في سنن الوضوء. So it should not be connected to wudu or even to the sunnah acts of wudu. Should not be considered a part of it. ولا في فرائضه. It's not even connected to the mandatory parts of wudu. What are the mandatory parts of wudu? You have to wash the hands, the face, and such, right? They're not connected at all to the removal of najasa. Now, obviously, the word istijmar, we said what? It's associated with little pebbles. So there's another form of cleaning that involves small stones. Remembering that at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they did not have running water like we have today. They didn't have plumbing. So one of the other means of removing impurities was to use small stones. So that is what the verb istajmara and its masdar istijmar, that is what they refer to. He said, وَهُوَ مِنْ بَابِ إِيجَابِ زَوَارِ النَّجَاسَ بِهِ. Right? However, you have to do it. Right? You have to do it in order to remove all of the impurities from your body, whether by means of istinja or istijmar. لَأَلَّ يُصَلِّ بِهَا فِي جَسَدِهِ. You have to do those so that you have to remove them from all the impurities, like from your body. وَيَجْزِعُ فِعْلُهُ بِغَيْرِ نِيَّةٍ. And so you want to with wudu, you have the intention to make wudu, but you do not need to have a niyyah to make istinja or istijmar, right? So if you relieve yourself, number one or number two, and then you proceed to clean yourself, you don't need to have the niyyah to clean yourself. Now, it doesn't mean that there isn't still some kind of like ibadah associated even with that, because we know before you enter into the place that you will relieve yourself, you make, isti'adha, you ask Allah for protection, min al-khubathi wal-khaba'ith, for example. And when you're done, you could make dua like, ghufranak, right? Thanking Allah Ta'ala and asking for pardon and thanking Him for removing those impurities from you. So that can be associated with cleaning, but he's saying that, however, the rules and the things that govern wudu have nothing to do with the rules that govern wudu. وَكَذَلِكَ غَسْلُ الثَّوْبِ النَّجِسِ. He said the same applies when washing impurities off of clothes, meaning that you get some kind of impurity on your clothes. You don't need to do the same type of ritual association with it. Like, I don't have to make the niyyah to clean. So if I got urine on my thobe, I don't have to have the niyyah to clean it. Where with wudu, generally there's the idea of niyyah and such that. So he's just showing us that these things are different. صفة الاستنجاء أن يبدأ بعد غسل يده. So he says what? That the way that you wash yourself after making istinja is first wash your hand and then your private parts. وغسل المخرج البولي ثم يمسح فيما مخرج من الأذى من مدر أو غيره أو بيده ثم يحكمها بالأرض. So he goes into some of the details about this. The main points that I wanted us to understand about this, like I said, this is not for the main intention to learn fiqh, but understanding the language. And so I put some extra notes in there about what that would be. So now let's ask the question, well, why not use the active voice? Or what if it had been the active voice? So I said, if he had written, مما يجب أن يصل فيه أحد الوضوء به, meaning that someone must connect wudu to it or must not do. So you would have to use what? Ahad. You would have to use like someone. But the difference is when you use the active verb and then you mention someone is still an explicit subject, right? To be quite honest, this sounds, maybe if you're not familiar to the level yet, but generally speaking, this sounds a little odd. It's grammatically correct, but it sounds a little clunky. It is more elegant in the Arabic to, in this case, to prefer to use the passive voice and to not explicitly mention the subject so that you can put the emphasis right on the action being done. And so as I said, going forward in reading texts, especially with this class being a focus on reading religious texts and reading the works of scholars writing about things like fiqh or tafsir and whatnot, this is going to be the style that they're going to write in. So you need to know to recognize, that's the passive voice. Because when you look at the page, right, when you look at that first paragraph, where's the subject? Like if you really look at that, right, وَلَيْسَ الْإِسْتِنْجَاءُ ... all the way to the end of the first paragraph, الثَّوْبِ النَّجِسِ. Where's the subject? There's no mention of any subject. There's mention of action being done, but it's in a kind of like abstract way, right? And therefore it's putting the emphasis on what you're doing. You're doing wudu, or you're not doing wudu, or you're doing istinja, or you're cleaning yourself, but there's never any real emphasis on who's doing the action, right? That's going to give you a clue like, oh, these are probably, if there are verbs involved, some of them are probably going to be in the passive voice. So that's just going to be a kind of a clue for you going forward. So I said this would shift, if it were the active voice versus the passive voice, this would shift the focus onto the person doing it rather on the hukm itself. And the issue with this is that, number one, where do ahkam come from? They come from two sources. One, the Quran, they come from Allah Ta'ala, or two, they come from the Prophet ﷺ, right? Therefore, we do not consider things that people do authoritative in and of itself, right? So if a scholar says something and he doesn't provide the adillah or doesn't explain the source or the proof or whatnot, we don't take that just in and of itself. Now, it's not saying that scholars can't write things that are not authoritative, but they themselves have to appeal to the ultimate authorities, at least for us as Muslims, which is either going to be Allah Ta'ala or His Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, right? So, if it were in the active voice, then it would shift to, especially in a book trying to explain, like a manual trying to explain things, then it would perhaps shift the wrong focus to what? The doer and not the action being done. Okay, so if we go to the, third page, under Quranic analysis, let's read, I'll have Rob read this one. Let's look at an example of how Allah Ta'ala also uses the passive voice as a way of emphasizing action versus actor. So let's read this passage here from Surah Al-Qasas. إلا رحمة فلا تكونن ظاهرا. Great. So now the word or the verb, more specifically in this ayah that is in the passive voice, that is majhul, is the yulqa. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَمَا كُنْتَ تَرْجُو أَن يُلْقَى. Yulqa and yulqa, this is what majhul. The meaning is that what you never expected, Allah Ta'ala is talking to who in this, right? He says, وَمَا كُنْتَ. Kunta, what? Meaning you. But who is the you in this sentence? No. The Prophet ﷺ, right? You never expected this book to be delivered, right? So, laqa, right? Alqa, or laqa means to deliver. It means to meet or have something meet you, right? So alqa can mean to meet. Yulqa means to meet you, or more elegantly in the English, right? To be delivered to you. So like we said, to be connected, to be delivered. So you, Ya ayyuhan Nabi, O Prophet Muhammad, you never expected this book, yani Al-Quran, to be delivered to you. But it came only as a mercy from your Lord, right? He said, إِلَّا رَحْمَةً مِّن رَبِّكَ. So in this case, how is it important that the emphasis is shifting to the act of deliverance versus the deliverer? Obviously, the one who delivers the Quran, right, from the biggest point of view, is obviously from Allah Ta'ala. Allah Ta'ala sends down the Quran. Jibreel alayhi salam, right, then brings the Quran. He's the angel of revelation. That then what brings it to the Prophet sallallahu. So in this ayah, Allah is neither emphasizing Himself, nor is He emphasizing Jibreel as the deliverers, so to speak, of revelation. What He's emphasizing is the delivery, the act of deliverance to who? The Prophet ﷺ. By Allah Ta'ala removing Himself as the primary focus in the sentence, in the statement. And therefore it shifts to what? The act of deliverance is the most important, and then secondarily the one that receives the act of deliverance. Is it a big thing for Allah Ta'ala to send a book? Is anything a big thing for Allah Ta'ala to do anything at all? No. Well, as Allah Ta'ala says, وَمَا ذَلِكَ اللَّهِ بِعَزِيزٍ. That is not a difficult thing for Allah to do, Right? Allah says, وَيَأْتِكُمْ Allah can remove you. وَيَأْتِكُمْ بِخَلْقٍ جَدِيدٍ. Allah Ta'ala can remove you and bring about a whole other creation, and that is not difficult for Allah to do. Nothing is difficult for Allah to do. Part of the audience reaction of the Quraysh to the Prophet ﷺ being singled out as the only recipient of the Quran. They're like, well, why him? Why not us? نحن الشرفاء من Quraysh. We are, we're the real noble of Quraysh. We should receive this. If anybody would receive it, it would be us, not him. His parents died. He's raised by his uncle, who is the weakest of us and the poorest of us. We are the rich and the powerful. So they want the action to come to them. So this is about delivery and not the deliverer. And so Allah is also giving a shahada. He's testifying that the Prophet ﷺ never asked for this. It's something he couldn't have possibly imagined on his own. And therefore he's saying that you could not have even hoped for, you could not have asked, you could not have thought this would ever happen to you. And yulqa ilayk. And so by emphasizing this, it shows that one, Allah Ta'ala can guide whomever He wants, can give a book to anyone He so chooses, and can select from His creation any that He wants to be His Nabi or His Rasul, and this is not difficult for Allah. What is difficult, or what is awe-inspiring, or what is grandiose about this, that feeling of grandiose or this massive thing is actually from the perspective of the Prophet ﷺ. So by putting it in the passive voice and by shifting from the doer in this case is Allah. Nothing is difficult for Allah. But if we shift it now to the one that's going to receive that action and the act itself of deliverance, now all of a sudden it brings into focus, this is a huge thing. It is beyond anybody's wildest dreams to be in direct communication with the Lord of the universe, with Rabbul Alameen, and to receive that revelation of which nobody else will receive. So it places that emphasis. That is what we get from the majhul fawq al-ma'lum. That's what we get of having the passive over the active. And so I put a few notes here. I said, if this were in the active voice, then the emphasis would be on Allah Ta'ala. And I kind of reframed the sentence, just imagining what if it were in the active voice. So, and yulqiya rabbuka ilayk al-kitab, right? That your Lord gives you a book. But it's not, it wouldn't mean anything to say then you couldn't have imagined. Because we cannot put a limitation on Allah, so that makes no sense to begin with. But we can put limitations on anything created, including even the Anbiya and even including the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam. So it goes to the passive voice. And so the implication of using the passive voice is that what? It focuses on the act of deliverance or being given and not the one doing it, even though that is Allah Ta'ala. And then it carries, as we said, a sense of grandeur. It carries with it a sense of awe that highlights the enormity of this book itself being given and being revealed. And as I wrote, right, it said it's not a big thing for Allah Ta'ala to grant anyone He chooses guidance. It is, however, a huge deal to be the recipient of that guidance. And so then even secondarily for us, it should be a huge thing that by way of Allah's mercy, إِلَّا رَحْمَةً مِّن رَبِّكَ, by way of Allah's mercy, then we receive that as well through the guidance and the delivery of the Prophet ﷺ. So this book is a huge thing. Us having this book being guided to it is an enormous thing. And this is, again, this is what comes from the utilization of the passive versus the active voice. It can also imply kind of universality, that this is a decree beyond the Prophet's anticipation, meaning that nobody has the ability to control revelation. Nobody has the ability to coerce it to come down or direct it to themselves versus anybody else. And that it is solely arranged by Allah Ta'ala's power and His discretion, And this is done so to give a sense of like awe and mystery and majesty, right? And so it's kind of what I highlighted here. You could call it a kind of like majestic indirectness. Like, wow, that is actually an unbelievably amazing thing to receive the Book of Allah. And therefore gives us even, or it should, help to inculcate in us a greater respect of who the Prophet ﷺ was and how much of a blessing and an honoring, like it's a great tashrif that Allah Ta'ala gave this book and delivered it to the Prophet ﷺ. And he is the leader of our ummah. And this again is a common style that you will find from the usloob of the Quran and generally of the classical works. Because the ulama are generally going to try to write their books emulating the style or the usloob of the Quran, because it is the most elegant speech. So as I said, if it were the active voice, you would have to write it as وَمَا كُنْتَ تَرْجُو أَنْ يُلْقِيَ رَبُّكَ إِلَى الْكِتَابِ, and you did not expect that your Lord would give you a book. That doesn't sound quite the same as you didn't expect to be given this book, right? It emphasizes the, oh my God, well, I didn't do anything to get this, right? If you put Allah as the primary doer, sure, it is a great honoring, but it's nothing for Allah to do that. So by, again, the passive voice that helps to accentuate that. And so, while that would be perfectly grammatically true, but again, Quran is not just about perfect grammar. Of course, the grammar in the Quran is correct, but it's also about its balagha and its usloob. It's about its emphatic style and so on. So that's the important part. Okay, let's read one more ayah, inshallah. You can read this one for us, inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ولا يحسبن الذين يبخلون بما آتاهم الله من فضله هو خيرا لهم بل هو شر لهم سيطوقون ما بخلوا به يوم القيامة ولله ميراث السماوات والأرض والله بما تعملون خبير.
MashaAllah. So in this case, the passive verb is going to be the beginning of the middle of the ayah. سَيُطَوَّقُونَ. سَيُطَوَّقُونَ. Okay, so let's take a look at our verb. And this one is going to be a little bit different, but the rule essentially will be the same. So if we look at our verb that's being used, first off, we have our jadar. We have our root. We have our jadar of what? Ta, waw, and qaf. Now, if we put this on the wazn of fa'ala, we're going to get tawwaqa, we will get tawwaqa yutawwiqu. But, and then the present tense plural would be it'll be yutawwiquna. So the singular yutawwiqun or yutawwiqu and the plural yutawwiquna. But just as we said before, in the majhul, we're going to, in the mudari', I can't tell you, I can't write today. We're going to get yutawwaqu. So yutawwiqu kasra, yutawwaqu fatha. It looks almost identical. And of course, the plural will be يطوقون. So the only difference is again going to be moving that middle letter and changing it from a kasra to a fatha. So it's going to have nasab. Therefore, it's going to be what? يطوقون. That's how we're going to make it into a present tense passive. It's going to be present tense passive. And so, as we said, what does this mean then? It means that it's going to place the emphasis on the action being done, not on the doer of the action. Now, the one difference between this and our previous example is going to be the use of sa. Are we familiar with sa and sawfa? Right? We also have sawfa. So you can place sawfa or sa at the beginning to make it something about the future, right? To make it future tense. So the way you make something future tense in Arabic is that you just add sa or sawfa. سَيُطَوَّقُونَ. سَيُطَوَّقُونَ is going to be what? What is the meaning of طَوَّقَ? تطويق, it means to leash, like تطويق الكلاب, kalb. You want to put a leash on a dog, or you can tie something around its neck. So Allah is saying, what those that are restricting the fadl of Allah, and they're blocking people from the path of Allah, they think what they're doing is good, but وَهُوَ شَرٌّ لَهُمْ. It's actually something evil that they're doing. And as a result, سَيُطَوَّقُونَ, on the day of judgment, in the hereafter, their necks will be leashed and chained. They will be leashed by Allah. So they will be leashed. That's why I put it in bold here. So we said, what? It doesn't mean the action has happened, right? Don't conflate the passive voice with the madin, with the completed action. We said what? It's still mudari'. It's still active, or in this case, actually future. It's like future tense, present tense. The idea is that what? The action is ongoing and habitual and has not completed and it has not had any cessation. So the implication is those that disobey Allah and are taking that which Allah Ta'ala has given as a fadl, as a bounty to those that He has deemed that deserve it, and they are blocking and prohibiting this and keeping it for themselves. Their punishment will be ongoing, even though it's being referred to in the future. So yutawwaquna is still passive, but because of the sa, it moves it from happening right now to it will be happening in the future. Right? So that is why it is not yutawwiqun, but yutawwaquna. That is one instance of how that is also used in the Quran. Okay. And you can, if you're interested, I can send you more examples, but those were just two examples to show both in a present and a sort of future tense context, right? The same hukum, nahwi, the same grammatical ruling applies. One was in the present tense and one was future tense, but the conjugation is still, right? The base conjugation is what? In the present tense. So just adding the sa doesn't change anything in terms of nahu, but ma'nawi, like the meaning is one is going to take place in the future. Then I show again, now this time I want us to look at another rule here. So in the sentence, صفة الاستنجاء إن يبدأ بعد غسل يده فيغسل مخرج البول. So in the statement where he's talking about the description of doing istinja, of using water, right, to clean yourself, he said the way that you wash yourself after going to the bathroom is first to wash, is first of all to wash your hands. So it says غسل al-yad. As we said before, the word ghusl and the verb ghasala can mean in general to wash, but then sometimes it means specifically to make a ghusl. By here, when he's saying what ghasl al-yad, right, to wash your hand, he's not meaning that you go make a full ghusl, it just means, right, to wash. But why is the verb, which would normally be yaghsilu, right, he washes in the present tense, why is it fa yaghsila? So we're going to look at this fa of sababiyah here. What is going on here? That's the word that I've put in bold on your sheet here. So the clue, right, is number one, it's going to go back to the en. So sifatul istinja'i en yabda'a. So the verb bada'a, yabda'u, is going to be yabda'a because of the en. And then as a result, the sababiyah, or the causal effect of starting, therefore, right, it's kind of like an if-then statement. If you want to make, after doing istinja, right, then you begin this, therefore, or then you do that. So that's what the fa is. And so it's going to carry that same rule from the an and apply it to yaghsilu, making it yaghsila. So we call this the fa of sababiyah or sababiyah, and that's going to be the one that typically is either associated, we said, either with what? An amr. For instance, وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. And as for the ni'am, or the blessings that Allah has given you, O Prophet Muhammad, فَحَدِّثْ. Then فَحَدِّث, to therefore what? Make mention of it. So because that has happened, then فَحَدِّثْ في صيغة الأمر, this is given in the command voice. So that's the fa of sababiyah. Or it can also refer to like a verb of intention or description, like in this case, right, the verb of beginning. يَبْدَأَ بَعْدَ غَسْلِ يَدِهِ. And so how does this rule work? إذا سبقت الفاء بفعل يدل على الطلب أو النية أو الإرادة أو الوصف نصب المضارع بعدها بأن مضمرة. Right? So when the fa is following a verb that shows either intent, niyya, or some type of description, or a command or an order, or even irada, like a want or a desire, then it puts the verb into the mansub. It puts it into what we call in English the subjunctive mood, with a hidden or an implied n being there. We don't write it, but it's sort of implied there. It's like saying fa'en, but we don't like to say fa'en because that sounds weird, like fa'en haddith. It sounds odd, right? So it's implied that it's there, it's mahdhuf, it's removed, and then it has the same meaning though. So here we have what? We have an yabda'a. That is what begins our clause, and then it finishes with fa yaghsila. And so we call this what? The fa of sababiyah plus the mode of mudari', present tense, mansub, right? It's in the raised state, bi an mudmara, right? Because of that rule that is there. It's a hidden one. Okay. وَمَنِ اسْتَجْمَرَ. As I said, and this is important particularly for our tajweed. So he says, وَمَنْ. Normally, we would write, especially in common Arabic, everyday speech, we would say, وَمَنْ istajmara. We would put a sukoon on the noon and say, وَمَنْ istajmara. This is fine for regular speech. Technically, though, we have to make this wasla because our verb istajmara, the alif in it is ghayru hamza. There's no hamza there. So if there's no hamza, we have to connect this with this. We have to connect this noon with the letter that comes after the alif, which in this case is the sin. And we do that by then putting a kasra. So, man istajmara. Right? Man istajmara. This is important because we have to follow this rule in tajweed. When this occurs in the Quran, you cannot say وَمَنْ istajmara. This would be unacceptable for the rules of tajweed. So even though in common speech most Arabs would say وَمَنْ istajmara, this is fine, but just keep in mind we want to make the wasla, we want to connect them, and that has to be done by putting the kasra on the noon. وَمِنْ اسْتَجْمَرَ بِثَلَاثَةِ أَحْجَارٍ يَخْرُجُ آخِرُهُنَّ. Now I've highlighted or bolded آخِرُهُنَّ نَقِيًّا. Why have I highlighted آخِرُهُنَّ? So again, he goes into the meaning that what? When doing istijmar or using little stones to clean yourself, it is sufficient to only use 3. Right? يَخْرُجُ آخِرُهُنَّ. Now, normally in Arabic, we have jama' taksir, that is, and then we have jama' plural of what? Taksir and salam. Salam means the sound plural. So Muslim, Muslimun, right? Muslim, Muslimun, or you add to the end of Muslim is una or ina, depending on its use in the sentence. And so by just adding the una or the ina, this means that it is what? Salam, it's sound. But then you have jama' taksir, right? Those broken plurals. And so for instance, you have like, you have kalb and kilab, right? We have a alif za'ida. We have an alif added to it, and so forth. It breaks up the form, right? Because it's broken up the order or it's added something to this. We call this a broken plural. Now, normally the rule is if you have an inanimate object or something generally other than humans, this is a general but a fairly expansive rule, that you will use a broken plural. So for instance, you have qalam, which is one pen, and aqlam would be the plural of, so pen and pens. If I wanted to refer to pens through a damir, through a pronoun, then I would just refer to it through ha, right? So aqlam, or like, you know, الطالبة لديها ثلاثة أقلام وهي فقدتها. The student has 3 pens and she lost them. So I can say فقدتها. I would not need to, I would not use the normal or the humanistic plural of hunna. Normally, I would just refer to them as ha. There are occasions, though, where you will want to break this norm, and I explained it here, right? So why is Ibn Abi Zayd, rahimahullah, why is he this time using akhiruhunna and not akhiruha? Why is he not referring to the ahjar? What's the ahjar? Hijr is a stone, ahjar is stones. Normally, ahjar being what? Jama' taksir, being a broken plural, it's an inanimate object. We would typically refer to it through ha. But here, he's referring to it to hunna, which is more typically reserved for human beings. But, as we learn in the rule, right, when you want to emphasize actual specific plurality of items that are countable, then you can use hunna. And so because he's teaching us a rule about using 3, 1, or 2, or 3, and then when you get to that last one, it's sufficient. So because he wants to emphasize the actual number, then he chooses to use آخرهن. Right, so he said, what the grammarians know that for non-human broken plurals, you can sometimes choose the ha, treating them as a collective. So when you want to refer to the ahjar as a collective and not really thinking about 1 or 2 or 3, then you would use ha. But when you really want to get granular, when you really want to get specific about this 1 or 2 or 3, then you can use hunna. Though this is not common, but you will find, so for instance, Ibn Aqil in his Sharh on the Alfiya does talk about this. وقد يجمع الضمير مع جمع غير عاقل لقلة ذلك وقصوره عن القياس. So sometimes the pronoun is made plural with a non-rational plural or a non-human plural. Though this is rare and not the typical rule. But because of what Ibn Abi Zayd is trying to teach us, he wanted to make sure that we understand that the number of stones here is really critical and not just that they are a plural. So saying akhiruhunna emphasizes the last of these distinctive stones, meaning that once you get to 3, this should be good enough. So if it were just akhiruha, it could be interpreted as just simply the last of the 3, and therefore the 1 or the 2 don't count, right? But each one of them has or plays a role, an important role in the function of istijmar. So you want to make sure when if you have to do tahara by way of istijmar, by using the stones, you want to make sure that each stone of those 3 is really doing some cleaning. So that's part of what is meant by that. ومن لم يخرج منه بول ولا غائط وتوضأ لحدث أو نوع أو غير ذلك مما يوجب. Now in this case, we have an active voice. مما يوجب الوضوء, and you'll notice in this case, al-wudu'a is actually the direct object, where in the passive it is not. It's treated like a subject, but like a kind of indirect or unmentioned subject. So مما يوجب الوضوء فلا بد من غسل يديه قبل دخولهما في الإناء. So in this case, he says, if someone has neither urinated nor defecated, but is just simply performing wudu because they broke it because they slept, or for any of the other reasons that you would normally make wudu, that makes wudu necessary, what he should wash his hands before he puts them into whatever water container he may be using. So by the fact that he mentions, right, mimma yujibul wudu'a, now it's in the active voice, he, even though it's kind of like saying ahad, like someone. But someone is actually a explicitly mentioned subject. So hopefully by reading, you might have to go over it a couple times, but you'll kind of see the difference. In this case, the emphasis is actually on someone doing the one who is doing the action versus the action now in general. Before he was talking about like a general rule, a general hukm. Now he's talking about an instance of somebody doing that hukm. So someone now gets elevated in the sentence and becomes more important, and the action becomes secondary, and therefore the object of that action therefore also has almost like a kind of equal importance. So it obligates or it necessitates, right? So the fa'il or the doer here, right, is implied by the verb itself, meaning someone, which is the subject. So it literally means like from what necessitates what? Mimma yujibu al-wudu'a. So the thing that necessitates wudu, and they are mentioned explicitly in the sentence. What does he mention of those things that necessitate wudu? He says what? Hadath, right? Going to the bathroom or something like that, passing wind. What? Aw noam, deep sleep. أو لغير ذلك, or anything like that. So those things are explicitly mentioned. So now we use an active verb to refer back to them. Right? So that's the difference kind of between, or a few examples between active and passive voice. It would make no sense. وَمِمَّا يُوجَبُ الْوَضُوءَ, it would make no sense in this case because you have just mentioned those things that do necessitate. In the beginning, this will take a little bit of practice, right? It'll take a little bit of practice. And so what I'll try to do over the next day or two is, like we've done in some of the weeks past, I'll draw up about 10 or 15 sentences, example sentences, both for active and for passive, that you can read, or some short paragraphs that will give you a healthy number of examples that will kind of demonstrate the mechanics of when and when they're not used, to help to really demonstrate those differences. And so hopefully that will help to make it kind of clear and straight. Any questions? So like I said, an important milestone is not just simply reading without the tashkil. Of course, that is. But along with that, and the only way you will be able to truly elevate above needing to read the tashkil is knowing some of these other rules, particularly like the active versus the passive. Because once you know that, then I know what that is, because I'm looking at what's coming before it. I don't see any explicit subject. Sometimes you have to think about it, right? The last example, right, on that page is, it doesn't jump out at you right away. So that last paragraph, وَمَنْ لَمْ يُخْرَجْ مِنْهُ بَوْلٌ وَلَا غَائِطٌ وَتَوَضَّعَ لِحَدَثٍ أَوْ نَوْمٍ أَوْ غَيْرِ ذَلِكَ, that passage, لِحَدَث and نَوْم and لِغَيْرِ ذَلِكَ, don't necessarily jump out at you as a subject, but they are. That is the subject. And so the al-fi'l قام على ذلك, right, the verb that's going to then act on their behalf is yujibu. And it's not going to be yujabu. So that's where, like, if it had said, like, Ahmed or Muhammad or Abdullah such and such, and then there's a verb, you say, oh, okay, there's the subject and then there's the verb. So that is more apparent. But when it's like inanimate things or conceptual things like sleep or some type of, things that like when he mentions hadith, what are the things that equate to hadith? So you have to do a little bit more thinking to recognize that in real time. And that just takes practice, to be able to read and to recognize that.
When it's referring to multiple things, why do they use the singular instead of yujibuna?
Because each of them is, number one, if you look, hadith, ma'nawiyan, mufrad, aw jama'. Right? So if you look at the word hadith, is it in it of itself, by itself, is it singular or plural? And is noam singular or plural? And is li ghayri dhalika singular or plural? So each of them in and of themselves are singular, though they constitute a group of things. And they're separated by aw, aw, aw. So the style of Arabic would prefer then to use a singular verb. Now, if those things were ahdath or anwam, then you would use the feminine, because it would be a broken plural. Then what? Mimma tujibu, right? Then that would be different. But because each of them are grammatically singular words, then we maintain that in the use of the verb. Make sense?
It does, yeah.
Okay.
It's different than
Yeah.
everything else.
But yeah, I think, you look at it from like a 40,000 foot level and it's like, oh, this is a collection of things. But in Arabic, the use of the aw and the aw and the aw is kind of like a comma. Because in classical Arabic, there's no punctuation marks. I mean, they have, there's periods and commas here and they use them now. But technically speaking, there's no punctuation in Arabic. Those words like m or aw, they function essentially like as, commas and periods and semicolons and that kind of thing. So because each of them is separated by an or, and they're by themselves grammatically singular things, then the verb is going to match that. Yeah.
Everything how it is in English. You use UG before. I guess
Right. You could say like,
does do.
right. So if someone has, even let's say, how does she choose to translate it, right? If someone has either urinated nor has neither urinated nor defecated, but is performing wudu because he has broken it in some way in some other way, meaning that's the hadith, or has been asleep, that's the nawm, or done something else which makes it necessary, that's the لِغَيْرِ ذَلِكَ, then it makes it necessary for him to perform wudu. مِمَّا يُوجِبُ الْوُضُوءَ فَلَا بُدَّ مِنْ غَسْلِ يَدَيْهِ. Then, no doubt, he should still wash his hands before doing so. So, yeah, and this goes to show, like, as I said before, an element of tarjama is ta'wil, right? There's an element of translation that is interpretation. That's why all translation is an act of interpretation. So, we tend to think of tafsir like, oh, I'm going to read tafsir as-Sa'di or al-Qurtubi or Ibn Kathir or whatever. But when you read some translation of the Quran into English, that's actually not just a translation, but actually a tafsir of Quran. It's just not labeled that way. All translation is an act of interpretation. And therefore, you have to learn the style. Every language has its style. What is the style of Spanish compared to English? What is the style of Arabic compared to English, right? You will note that it's generally, once you start trying to express phrases, let alone sentences, you cannot just do it kalima bi kalima. It doesn't work, right? You have to massage it a little bit to make it render into that language in a way that is, comfortable and intelligible and stylistically matching it. And so something that might work in Arabic will be different in English. I mean, one simple example is قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, right? That phrase, Allahu Ahad. In Arabic, أهذه جملة فعلية أو اسمية, right? Is this a verbal or a non-verbal sentence? Meaning, are there any verbs in that sentence, or are they just nouns? Right, Allahu Ahad, just nouns. How do we say Allahu Ahad in English?
Allah is one.
What is? It's a verb, right? So we take in Arabic, that is a non-verbal sentence. You cannot say Allah one. I mean, if you say that, you sound like you're about 1.5 or 2. I know what you mean, but you also sound like you have a closed head injury, right? It doesn't sound accurate. Allah one, right? Come on, use your big words now, right? That doesn't sound eloquent. It doesn't sound, it's not intelligible fully. So even though it is a jumla ismiya in Arabic, I don't have to be tied to that in order to make it make sense in English. I have to say Allah is one. Now, because Allah has chosen to describe himself without using any kind of verb of being, now you're getting into a whole other area, right? And so most importantly, do not feel that, okay, because of this rule in Arabic, it must have this rule in English. If you do that as an absolute, then you might say something that just doesn't make sense. And nor are you being truthful to the eloquence of the Quran when you're trying to match them together, right? Bring it from the meaning from one language into the next. Now, I'm not saying you should be agnostic to that, particularly when it does come to interpretation. And so you can be aware of that grammatical difference or that syntactical difference or whatever. But that doesn't mean you have to, again, be so hyper literal that you wind up saying something that makes no sense or makes very poor sense. Yeah. So that's like one simple example. Any other questions? Thoughts? Comments? So alhamdulillah, like I said, I will send out by way of probably through Discord. I'll put up some of those examples. If you're more than welcome, I can either send it to Rob and Rob can send it to you or whatnot, and you can check out the PDF that I'll send. They'll just give I like to give about 10 or 15 examples of both active and passive in a few sentences, in a few short paragraphs, just to show how to train, kind of like how to train your eye to look for when you should not just assume that it's always active, that, oh, this might be passive. Inshallah, that will help. وصلوات الله تعالى على النبي الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. الحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خيرا. Thank you for coming. Alhamdulillah.